The rain was coming down in sheets when I pulled into my daughter's driveway that Friday evening. October in Vermont had always been unpredictable, but this storm felt different, heavier somehow, like the sky itself was trying to warn me of something I couldn't yet understand. I'm 73 years old, and I've learned to trust my instincts, but that night I ignored the gnawing feeling in my gut. I told myself it was just excitement. After all, I hadn't seen my grandson, Tyler, in nearly 4 months. My daughter, Karen, had always found excuses. She was busy with work, Tyler had soccer practice, the house was being renovated. There was always something. But when Tyler called me 2 days ago, his voice trembling on the other end of the line, I knew I had to come. He didn't say much, just that he needed to see me, that it was important, that he missed me. How could I say no to that? I sat in my car for a moment, watching the lights flicker in the windows of the 2-story colonial house my late husband Harold and I had helped Karen and her husband David buy 15 years ago. The down payment had taken a significant portion of our savings, but we didn't care. Family was everything to Harold. It was everything to me, too. At least I thought it was everything to Karen as well. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my overnight bag and my umbrella and made my way to the front door. Before I could even ring the bell, the door flew open, and there he was, my Tyler, all gangly limbs and messy brown hair, his eyes red-rimmed as if he'd been crying. "Grandma!" He threw his arms around me, nearly knocking me off balance. At 12 years old, he was already almost as tall as me. "Oh, my sweet boy," I murmured, holding him tight. I could feel his heart pounding against my chest, fast and frightened like a caged bird. "What's wrong? What's happened?" "You came. I didn't know if you would come." "Of course I came. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." "Mom!" Karen's voice rang out from somewhere inside the house. Tyler stiffened in my arms. His grip on me tightened, and when he pulled back, I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Fear. Pure, undiluted fear. "Don't tell her I called you. Promise me, Grandma. Promise me." Before I could respond, Karen appeared in the hallway. She was wearing a crisp white blouse and black slacks, her work clothes, even though it was nearly 8 o'clock on a Friday evening. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her smile, when she saw me, didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mother," she said, and I noticed she didn't move to embrace me. "This is unexpected." "I was in the area," I lied, the words tasting sour on my tongue. "Thought I'd surprise my favorite grandson." "Your only grandson," Tyler said, but his attempt at our old joke fell flat. His eyes kept darting between us, between me and his mother, watchful and wary. Karen's smile tightened. "Well, come in then. You're letting all the heat out." The house felt different than I remembered, colder somehow, despite the warmth of the central heating. The family photos that used to line the hallway had been rearranged, and I noticed with a pang that several pictures of me and Harold were missing. In their place hung modern art prints, abstract shapes in cold blues and grays. "Where's David?" I asked, settling onto the leather sofa in the living room. Tyler sat beside me, pressed so close that his shoulder touched mine. Karen noticed this, and something flickered across her face. Annoyance, perhaps, or was it guilt? "Working late," Karen said curtly, "as usual. Can I get you something to drink? Tea? Coffee?" "Tea would be lovely." She nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. The moment she was gone, Tyler grabbed my hand. "Grandma, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something important, but not here, not where she can hear." "Tyler, you're scaring me. What's going on?" His eyes welled with tears. I I can't tell you yet. She watches me. She checks my phone. But please, Grandma, please, whatever you do, don't go back home tonight. Don't go back home at all. Not until I can explain." "Don't go back home? Tyler, I don't understand." The sound of Karen's footsteps made us both jump. Tyler quickly wiped his eyes and plastered on a fake smile that broke my heart. How long had my grandson been pretending? How long had he been hiding something that terrified him this much? "Here you go, Mother." Karen set a cup of tea in front of me. Her movements were precise, mechanical. "Tyler, don't you have homework to finish?" "It's Friday," he protested, "and you have a test Monday. Go on, you can visit with Grandma tomorrow." Tyler looked at me, desperation written across his young face. I squeezed his hand and tried to communicate with my eyes. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll figure this out. Trust me." Reluctantly, he stood and trudged toward the stairs. At the landing, he looked back at me one more time. The fear in his eyes haunted me long after he disappeared into his room. "He's been acting strange lately," Karen said, settling into the armchair across from me. She crossed her legs and took a sip of her own tea. "Moody, secretive. You know how boys his age can be." "I remember you at that age," said I carefully. "You were quite the handful yourself." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "I was nothing like him." We sat in uncomfortable silence. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault on the windows. I found myself studying my daughter, searching for traces of the little girl who used to climb into my lap and beg me to read her stories, the teenager who told me all her secrets, the young woman who wept in my arms when Harold died. But that woman seemed like a stranger now. This Karen was polished and cold, her eyes calculating as they watched me. "So," she said finally, "you were in the area? That's quite a coincidency considering you live 3 hours away." I set down my teacup. "Can't a mother visit her daughter?" "Of course. It's just you could have called first." "Would you have let me come if I had?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Karen's expression flickered, and for just a moment I saw something beneath the mask. Guilt, anger, fear, perhaps all three. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked. "It means I've barely seen you or Tyler in months. Every time I call, you're too busy. Every invitation I extend gets declined. I'm starting to feel like you don't want me in your lives anymore." Karen sighed and set down her cup. "Mother, it's not like that. Life is just complicated right now. Work is demanding, Tyler's school schedule is insane, and David—" "What about David?" She looked away. "We're going through some things, that's all." "Are you separating?" "No, not exactly." She stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to me. "There are some financial issues. Things have been tight. David made some bad investments, and we're trying to recover." I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. "How bad?" Karen was silent for a long moment. When she turned back to me, her expression had changed, softer now, almost pleading. "We might lose the house, Mother. We're 3 months behind the mortgage. The bank is threatening foreclosure." "Oh, Karen." I rose and moved toward her, but she held up a hand to stop me. "That's not why I'm telling you. I'm not asking for money." "But if you need help—" "I said I'm not asking." Her voice hardened again. "I'm just explaining why things have been difficult, why I haven't been the best daughter lately." I wanted to believe her. Every fiber of my being wanted to accept this explanation and put the strange encounter with Tyler out of my mind. But I couldn't forget the terror in my grandson's eyes, the urgency in his whispered warning. Don't go back home. What did he know? What had he heard? That night, I lay awake in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old house made me jump. Every shadow seemed sinister. At around 2 in the morning, I heard my door creak open. I tensed, my hand sliding toward the lamp on the nightstand, ready to... "Grandma?" Tyler's whisper cut through the darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yes, sweetheart. Come in." He slipped into the room like a ghost, closing the door silently behind him. In the dim light from the window, I could see he was shaking. "She's asleep. I waited until I was sure. Grandma, we need to talk." I sat up and patted the edge of the bed. He sat down heavily, and I wrapped my arm around his shoulders. "Tell me everything," I said, "from the beginning." Tyler took a shuddering breath. "It started about 6 months ago. Dad and Mom started fighting a lot, about money mostly. I'd hear them late at night when they thought I was asleep. Dad said they were going to lose everything. Mom said she had a plan." "What kind of plan?" I said. "I didn't know at first, but then Mom started talking on the phone a lot, to lawyers, I think, and to someone else, a man named Marcus. She'd go into her office and close the door, but sometimes I'd listen through the vent." My heart was pounding now. "What did you hear?" Tyler looked up at me, his eyes glistening with tears. "She talked about you, Grandma, about your house, about your savings. She said she could get control of everything if she could prove you were," she used a word I had to look up, "incompetent." The word hit me like a physical blow. "Incompetent?" "She said you were getting forgetful, that you couldn't take care of yourselves anymore, that it would be easy to get a doctor to sign off on papers that would give her power of attorney." I felt like I was falling, even though I was sitting perfectly still. "But I'm not, Tyler. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. I'm sharp as a tack." "I know, Grandma. I know. But she's been planning things. She said she had friends, people who could help her make it look real, a doctor who would sign anything for the right price, a lawyer who specializes in elder something." "Elder law," I whispered. "They handle things like guardianship and estates." "That's it. She said once she had control, she could sell your house, access your accounts, everything. She said it would be enough to save theirs and have plenty left over." I couldn't breathe. My own daughter, my Karen, planning to steal everything from me? Not just my money, but my autonomy, my independence, my dignity. "When?" I managed to ask. "When is she planning to do this?" "Soon, maybe next week. She was on the phone yesterday, and she said everything was ready. She said they just needed you to do one more thing first." "What thing?" Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "I found it in her office. I wasn't supposed to be in there, but I had to know." I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was a printout of an email chain between Karen and someone named Marcus Wheeler, who apparently worked at a law firm that specialized in estate planning and guardianship cases. The emails made my blood run cold. Karen had been methodical. She documented every minor forgetfulness, me misplacing my keys, asking about a neighbor who had moved away 2 years ago, repeating a story I'd already told. Normal things that everyone does, but twisted into evidence of cognitive decline. But that wasn't the worst of it. "She's coming Friday," Karen had written in the most recent email. "I'll make sure she takes the medication I told you about. It should make her confused enough for the evaluation on Monday. Dr. Harrison is ready to sign the paperwork. By next week, we'll have full control." Medication. She was planning to drug me. "The tea," I whispered, remembering the cup Karen had made for me earlier. I'd only taken a few sips before the bitter taste had put me off. I'd thought it was just cheap tea. "I saw her put something in it," Tyler said, his voice cracking. "I wanted to warn you, but she was watching me all through dinner. I was so scared, Grandma. I thought maybe you'd already drunk it all." I pulled him into a fierce hug, my own tears flowing now. "You brave, brave boy! You may have saved my life." "What are we going to do?" he asked, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "If you go home, she'll come for you. The doctor is supposed to visit Monday, and she has a key to your house. She gave it to that lawyer man." My mind was racing. I thought of my home, the house Harold and I had shared for 45 years, the garden where I still grew tomatoes every summer, the room that was still full of his books, his photographs, his memory. The idea of Karen and some corrupt lawyer going through my things, taking what they wanted, disposing of my treasures like garbage, it made me sick. It made me furious. But more than anything, it made me determined. "Does your mother know you found this email?" "No, I was careful." "Good. You need to keep pretending everything is normal. Can you do that for me?" He nodded, though I could see how much the idea terrified him. "I'm going to leave very early in the morning," I said, "before she wakes up. I'll tell her I got a call, an emergency at home. I need you to cover for me if she asks questions. Can you do that?" "But, Grandma, you can't go home. That's the first place she'll look." "I'm not going home, sweetheart. I'm going somewhere safe, somewhere I can figure out how to fight back. Your grandfather may be 73 years old, but I am not incompetent, and I will not let anyone take what's mine, including my dignity." Tyler looked at me with something like awe. "You're really brave, Grandma." I smiled, though my heart was breaking. "I learned from the best. Your grandfather never backed down from a fight in his life. Neither will I." I left at 5 in the morning, before the sun had even thought about rising. I left a note for Karen, something about a neighbor calling about a burst pipe. Very apologetic, would call later. A lie, but a necessary one. The drive to my lawyer's house took 2 hours. Miriam Chen had been my attorney for 20 years, one of Harold's oldest and most trusted friends. I arrived on her doorstep just as she was putting on her coffee, still in her rabthrope. "Eleanor," she blinked at me in confusion. "What on earth?" "I need help, Miriam. My daughter is trying to have me declared incompetent so she can steal my assets. I have evidence, and I need to act fast." Miriam's expression shifted from confusion to steely determination. She'd seen cases like this before, she told me, as she ushered me inside. Elder abuse was more common than people realized, and it often came from the people you trusted most. Over coffee and croissants, I told her everything. I showed her the email Tyler had found. I described the tea that Karen had tried to give me, the doctor who was supposedly ready to sign fraudulent paperwork, the lawyer who was helping orchestrate the whole thing. Miriam took notes, her fountain pen scratching across the legal pad with practiced efficiency. When she finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with fierce resolve. "We're going to fight this, and we're going to win." The next few weeks were a blur of legal filings, private investigators, and clandestine phone calls with Tyler, who was keeping me informed about Karen's growing frustration. She couldn't find me. I'd moved into a small apartment Miriam helped me rent under an assumed name. My bank accounts were locked down, my security system with new locks and a security system. Every move Karen had anticipated, we blocked. But the most important thing we did was gather evidence. The private investigator Miriam hired was able to trace the money trail between Karen and Marcus Wheeler. It turned out they were having an affair, had been for over a year. David knew nothing about it. More importantly, we discovered that Wheeler had done this before. He targeted wealthy seniors through their estranged or desperate family members, helping to facilitate guardianship fraud for a cut of the proceeds. He'd gotten away with it 4 times before, each time with a different client, each time with a grieving family too devastated to fight back. But I wasn't grieving. I was furious. The day we presented our evidence to the district attorney was the first day I felt like I could truly breathe again. They agreed to launch an investigation, not just into Karen and Wheeler, but into Dr. Harrison, the physician who had been ready to sign false medical documentation. And through it all, I thought about Tyler. My brave grandson, who had risked everything to warn me, who had been living in that house with a mother who was capable of such cruelty, who had probably seen things no 12-year-old should ever have to see. When the indictments came down, Karen was arrested at her office. The news coverage was merciless. A local attorney caught in an elder abuse scandal, conspiring to defraud her own mother. Wheeler was arrested too, along with Dr. Harrison. David, who had apparently known nothing about the affair or the fraud, filed for divorce almost immediately. But through it all, my biggest concern was Tyler. The custody hearing took place on a gray November morning, 3 months after that rainy night when I'd first arrived at Karen's door. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, clutching my purse like a lifeline, watching as lawyers argued about the fate of my grandson. David wanted custody, and I couldn't fault him for that. He was a good man who had been betrayed by his wife in the worst possible ways. But Tyler had told me in one of our many phone calls that he wanted to live with me. I love Dad, but you understand me, Grandma, you always have. When it was my turn to speak, I stood on shaky legs and made my way to the witness stand. The judge, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a nonsense demeanor, watched me approach with interest. Mrs. Harrison, I understand you're petitioning for partial custody of your grandson, Tyler, correct? Yes, Your Honor. And you understand that this is an unusual arrangement given the circumstances. I do, Your Honor, but if I may speak freely? She nodded. I took a deep breath. 3 months ago, my grandson saved my life. He risked everything to his relationship with his mother to warn me about what was happening. He was terrified, but he did it anyway because he loved me and wanted to protect me. That kind of courage, that kind of love, it deserves to be honored. Tyler needs stability. He needs to know that the people who love him will always be there for him. I may be 73 years old, but I am sound of mind and body, and I will do whatever it takes to give that boy the safe, loving home he deserves. The courtroom was silent. I saw David wiping his eyes. I saw the judge lean forward, her expression thoughtful. Mrs. Harrison, I've reviewed the evidence in this case. I've seen what you've been through. I've seen the courage both you and your grandson have shown, and I've seen the love that clearly exists between you. She paused, and my heart felt like it might burst. I'm awarding shared custody between Mr. Harrison and you, Mrs. Harrison. Tyler will spend weekdays with his father and weekends with his grandmother. I trust this arrangement will give him the stability and love he needs. I couldn't hold back my tears. I looked across the courtroom and saw Tyler sitting in the front row, his face breaking into the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. He mouthed the words, "Thank you," and I mouthed them right back. Karen was sentenced to 8 years in prison for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted elder abuse. Marcus Wheeler got 12. Dr. Harrison lost his medical license and received 3 years. I visited Karen once, about 6 months after her sentencing. She was being held at a women's correctional facility about an hour from my home. I didn't know what to expect. Anger, denial, pleas for forgiveness. What I got was something else entirely. She looked older, smaller somehow in her orange jumpsuit. The harsh fluorescent lights made her skin look sallow, and her hair, no longer in its perfect ponytail, hung limply around her face. "Why did you come?" she asked, her voice flat and lifeless. "Because you're my daughter. Because, despite everything, I love you." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Love. Is that what this is? You could have let it go. You could have given me what I asked for. It would have been easier for everyone. You asked for my dignity, Karen. You asked for my independence. You were willing to drug me, to have me declared incompetent, to lock me away in some institution while you sold off everything I've ever worked for. That's not asking. That's taking. That's betrayal. For the first time, I saw something crack in her facade. Her eyes welled with tears. I was desperate, she whispered. We were going to lose everything. I didn't know what else to do. You could have asked me for help, Karen, I said, my voice gentle. You could have told me the truth. I would have done anything for you, Karen. I would have sold my house, drained my savings, worked 3 jobs if it meant helping you. I'm your mother. That's what mothers do. Karen broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands. I know. I was stupid. I was selfish. Marcus made it sound so easy. He said no one would get hurt, that you'd be comfortable, that you wouldn't even know the difference. But Tyler knew, and he chose to protect me. She flinched at her son's name. How is he? He's doing well. He's getting straight A's. He's playing basketball now. He has friends. He smiles. Does he ever ask about me? I hesitated. Sometimes. I'd tell him the truth, that you made a terrible mistake, but that somewhere deep down you love him, that people can change if they want to. Karen looked up at me, hope flickering in her eyes. Do you believe that? That people can change? I thought about Harold, who had taught me that forgiveness was not about excusing what someone did, but about freeing yourself from the burden of anger. I thought about Tyler, who had shown me that courage could come in the smallest packages. I thought about myself, who had discovered at 73 that I was stronger than I ever knew. Yes, I said finally, I believe people can change. The question is whether you want to. It's been 2 years since that conversation. Karen is still in prison, but we exchanged letters now. She started therapy. She's joined a program that helps inmates at their GEDs. She's slowly, painfully becoming someone different. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust her again. Some wounds heal, some leave scars forever. But I've chosen to leave the door open, to believe in the possibility of redemption. Tyler is 14 now, taller than me by a full head, with his grandfather's brown eyes and his father's quiet strength. He lives with David during the week and spends every weekend at my house, the house Harold and I built our lives in, the house I almost lost. We have our rituals now. Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday afternoon walks in the garden, evenings by the fire, where I tell him stories about his grandfather, about the family history, about the importance of doing what's right, even when it's hard. Grandma, he said to me last week as we watched the sun set over the Vermont hills, do you ever regret it, coming that night? I thought about everything that had happened since. The fear, the betrayal, the legal battles, the tears, but also the love, the justice, the new beginning. No, I said, pulling him close, I don't regret a single moment because it brought me to you. He smiled, and in that moment I knew that everything had been worth it. The storm had raged, the lightning had struck, and somehow, impossibly, we had found our way through to the other side, where the light was waiting.